Hey everybody, my name is Eric Comley. I'm the Garrett County 4-H Youth Development Agent. And a few weeks ago, Ashley Osborne, who is our state specialist for natural resources, had asked me if I would do a quick video on reptiles and amphibians. So, of course, I said I would. I'm really excited to do it. When I was a kid, I desperately wanted to be a herpetologist. I wanted to be somebody who studied reptiles and amphibians because I was absolutely fascinated with snakes. So I'm excited to help out as much as I possibly can. I know that you all probably know a lot already about reptiles and amphibians, so I may be reinforcing some of the things that you already know, and hopefully I can teach you a few different things about reptiles and amphibians. So just talking about what I initially said, so I wanted to be a herpetologist, and a herpetologist is somebody who studies reptiles and amphibians. So the study of so it's called herpetology. Herpetology comes from two words. It comes from a Greek word, herpeton, which means creeping things, and ology, which means the study of. So if you become a herpetologist, you study creeping things, okay, which sounds worse than it probably should, but reptiles and amphibians are awesome. So as far as reptile is concerned, that word in itself means creeping thing. So that's where all of that comes from. A little bit of the etymology or the word history as far as herpetology is concerned. So let me start with reptiles. When we talk about reptiles, we're talking about really four groups of animals, okay, that all make up reptiles. We're talking about crocodilians, and that can be, anything that we have. We have crocodiles and alligators in the southern part of the United States, but not here in Kentucky. Obviously, we have turtles, we have snakes, and we have lizards. So those four groups, crocodilians, turtles, snakes, and lizards, are the four that make up the group reptiles. So when we talk about those, we're talking about a group of animals that has scales or bony plates. So if you look at a snake, or you look at a turtle, or you look at an alligator, or you look at some sort of lizard, then you're going to find scales on it in some way, shape, or form, okay, or what may be called bony plates or scutes. So when we talk about scales, those primarily cover, you'll see scales on all four of those. As far as the bony plates are concerned, or scutes are concerned, those are actually only found on a couple of. So your crocodilians, your alligators and crocodiles and gharials and all of those kinds of things, those all have armored-like plates that go across their back. And so those are called scutes. And then you also have the carapace, or the shell of a turtle, and those are also called scutes as well. So another thing about reptiles is they actually are what are called ectothermic. So a lot of people will call that cold-blooded, which means that they don't have an internal heating structure for their bodies. So we have a traditional heating structure, or a characteristic heating structure as a mammal, and our body temperature stays somewhere around 98.6 degrees-ish, okay? Some may be warmer, some may be cooler. But with reptiles, they don't have that internal heating structure, and so what that means is they have to get outside heat. Hence ecto, so meaning outside, thermic meaning heat. So they require something else to provide them with heat. And obviously here on planet Earth, we generally use the sun. Now there's all kinds of artificial things that, especially when we think about that, we think a lot about snakes, because they'll come out on the roadway and warm themselves up on a road, or sometimes people will get them in their car engine because those get warm, but they are looking for a heat source. And so those two characteristics alone, scales or scutes or bony plates, and then also ectothermic, okay? Now, as far as the way they have young, there's really two ways that reptiles will have young. One of them is called oviparous, and which means that they actually lay eggs, like a real egg. And then one is called viviparous, and which means that they lay a live birth, okay? And so you primarily see an exchange of both of those things in snakes, okay? And we'll talk a little bit about those things. So when we're talking about reptiles in Kentucky, what are we talking about? How many do we have? Well, that's fairly easy. We have somewhere around 32 different species of snakes in Kentucky. We have 10 different species of lizards, and we have 14 different species of turtles. So as far as our diversity is concerned, it's really good, I mean, to be where we're at. When you think about Kentucky, you think about the mountains in the east, and then as you get into the rolling hills and all the way down into the flat areas of the western Kentucky, especially as you get towards the Mississippi River, then you know that we have a broad range of habitat. We have forests, we have swamps, we have rolling hills and grasslands, or we have all these different areas, lakes, especially when we have streams and rivers and creeks and ponds. We have all these different areas. And so when we have that diversity of habitat, that means that we're going to have a diversity of species as well. And reptiles and amphibians are no different. So as far as reptiles are concerned, with snakes, we'll focus on snakes a little bit, but we have 32 different species of snakes, and we have 4 species of venomous snakes. And those 4 species are the northern copperhead, the western cottonmouth, the timber rattlesnake, and also what is called the pygmy rattlesnake, which is only found in a small area around the land between the lakes, or in the land between the lakes. So those are our 4 venomous snakes. Now notice that I didn't say poisonous, because we actually don't have any poisonous snakes in Kentucky. So it's really about the word, the difference between poisonous and venomous. And so I'm going to let you all kind of discover that together as you all go through the program, the Wildlife Gardener program. So what do snakes do for us? So as you all start to develop your wildlife gardener habitats, or you start to learn about animals and what requirements animals have for their particular habitats, you know that you're gonna find out that, especially with reptiles, they're always looking for a source of heat or something that's going to warm up their body, and then they're always going to look for some sort of food. All right. So for us, I have moles and voles in my yard, and I would love to get rid of them. Well, I know that I have a big rat snake that lives in my yard, and that's what snakes generally do for us is, we require these predators, okay, to make sure that they keep the populations of prey items, things like mice and moles and voles and rats and all kinds of things. We want them to keep those populations down. So it's reptiles, snakes, we'll say, snakes in this particular case, are really important as far as keeping populations of things down. So that's, that's one of the keys. Now, what if you see a snake? Okay. Number one, I would always encourage you, if you're going to be out and you're going to be about, if you're going to be looking around in a wild area, or even if you're not, I would encourage you to keep a few resources on hand. So maybe like this book that's from the Kentucky Department of Fish and Wildlife Resources, which is excellent. Maybe this book here. This book here, this actually is one that's really special to me. It was given to me in 1983 by my grandparents. So I would keep some resources on hand so that you would be able to identify. Now, I strongly, strongly discourage you from ever putting your hands on any wild animal, even a domestic animal that you're not familiar with, because you don't know what that animal is capable of. And even if you know a lot about animals, it is just not good practice to put your hands on them. So if you see a snake, or if you see a turtle, or if you see a lizard or something like that, just observe it from where it's at. If you're too close, make sure that you take a step back from it, but give it its space. And then generally what's going to happen is it's going to try and get away from you. Reptiles, and I'm speaking more along the lines of snakes, especially because there's a lot of fear that's associated with snakes, is that you want to make sure that, or we want to make sure, I mean, globally, locally, I mean, regionally, as a state, whatever you want to say, we want to make sure that those animals are protected, because they do serve a very important purpose, not only to keep populations of those like rodents that I was talking about earlier, but I mean, there's a lot of medical research that goes along with some of the venomous snakes that we see in Kentucky too. Copperheads, I think that they're doing research on copperheads for things like cancer and diabetes. So, it's really important that we keep populations of those animals around. So I hope that you've learned a little bit about reptiles. I'm going to stop and I'm going to actually record another section on amphibians. And so if you ever have any questions about reptiles, or if you have one that you need identified, feel free to contact me. My email address is eric, ERIC, .comley, COMLEY, at uky.edu, or you can reach me on Facebook at the Garrett County 4-H Facebook page. So thank you very much, and we'll talk about amphibians in just a moment. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about amphibians. So amphibians, when we think about reptiles and amphibians, we're like, how do they go together? When you think about amphibians, you're thinking about like salamanders and frogs and toads and those kinds of things, so, and newts. So how do they go together? Well, the one characteristic really that they share similar is what we talked about also with reptiles, which is both groups are ectotherms. So they require some sort of outside heat source in order to warm their body up. Now with salamanders and frogs and toads and newts and all those kinds of things, one of the things, the key characteristics about them is they generally have moist skin. So even when you see things like a toad that has this bumpy, warty looking skin, it has to stay moist, okay? Or it has to stay damp. And so they want to be around water. So amphibia, I mean, when you think about anything, when you're talking about amphibious vehicles, you're talking about things or vehicles that can go in the water and can also go on land. So they can go back and forth. So that's really what an amphibian is. It's an animal that can transition back and forth between the water and the land. So in Kentucky, we have 35 different species of salamanders, and we have 23 different species of frogs and toads. Now that's pretty amazing, especially the salamander part, because when you're thinking about salamanders in the United States, or actually in North America, there's 113 different species of salamanders that we find in North America, but we have 35. So we basically have a third of all the different species of salamanders that are found in North America. And that's pretty amazing. And remember, I talked to you when we talked about reptiles, I talked to you about all the different kinds of habitats that we have and all the different places that you could find things. That's a big reason. So protecting our habitat, and you all as Junior Master Gardener, wildlife gardeners, learning about habitat and how to develop habitat and what that is, that's going to be really key, because we can continue to develop habitat even as people start to take over areas in your backyard. You can create all kinds of cool habitat that would bring in a variety of animals, including reptiles and amphibians. So we have these 35 salamanders, and we have some that are very small. We have some that are very large. We have, in North America, we have the largest, and Kentucky is one of the states that has the largest species of salamander in North America. It's called the hellbender, and it can get to be about a foot long, okay? So it can be really big, and they require such pristine and really clean habitats. They typically like streams and rivers, so that's the places. So we have all these cool places in Kentucky. So anyway, getting back to a couple of things about amphibians. When we think about frogs and toads, all frogs and toads lay their eggs in water. Okay, so if you see a toad, a common American toad or a Fowler's toad, which are our two more common toads that we see in Kentucky, even if you see those, they still have to go and deposit their eggs in water or in some sort of aquatic environment. Some other things that we think about is that all adult frogs and salamanders and toads all are predators. And even in some of the nymph stages, they're predators. And the only one that we think, or that we know, is a vegetarian are tadpoles. Tadpoles that you see swimming around in a pond or whatever, they're actually vegetarian. Okay, so one of the cool things about salamanders is their skin. So the skin for salamanders is really unique. And like I said, just in the United States or just in North America, we have 113 different species, but in Kentucky we have those 35. And so there's all kinds of cool things about them. So the skin for a salamander, it produces proteins, and those proteins can help with the transport of water, that can help with the transport of oxygen, that can help with the transport of CO2. They also can protect the salamander from bacteria and fungus, and even in some cases, the skin actually is used as a defense. So that's really amazing to think about, that their skin. So when we think about proteins that are transporting water and oxygen, and well, especially oxygen and carbon dioxide, what is it about the human body that does that? It's our lungs. So even in some species of salamanders, they're exchanging carbon dioxide and oxygen through their skin. Okay, so that's really important. So that's one of the reasons that if you see a salamander, you can appreciate it, but don't ever pick it up with dry hands. Because when you do, even though you may feel like, oh, my hands are really soft and they're really smooth, they may not be. And so when you pick up that salamander, what happens is that your dry hands picking up that wet salamander may pull off some of that slime layer that's on a salamander and may create some issues for them. So please make sure that you leave salamanders alone. Not only that, is the one thing that we want to watch out for when we look at salamanders and when we look at frogs is how soft their skin is. Okay, so it can easily be damaged. But not only are those proteins actually distributing or transporting all those things that they actually need, but sometimes they're transporting things that they don't need. So when we're talking about salamanders, there's all kinds of pollutants that are in the water or in those aquatic systems where they're generally found. And so some of those pollutants can actually be absorbed into their skin. Okay, so it's just like poisoning those salamanders. So it's really important that we're mindful of the things that we put on our yards or that we put into water, because those things can be harmful not only just to people, but also to some of the wildlife that are found in those aquatic habitats. Okay, now as far as frogs and toads are concerned, we have 8 true frogs in Kentucky. We have 11 tree frogs. So we have 8 true and 11 tree, okay? And then we have 2 true toads, and that's the Fowler toad and also the American toad, the one I was talking about earlier. And then, so that's 21. Well, I told you that there's 23 frogs and toads in Kentucky. I think that's what I said. And so the other one, there is a narrow-mouthed toad, and there's also a spadefoot. Now, the spadefoot is really cool, or at least I think it's really cool, because you only can go out and find them during really heavy thunderstorms. Now, am I encouraging you to go out in the middle of a big thunderstorm? Absolutely not. But that's the time that they come out. So if you grow up and you become a herpetologist and you're like, I really want to study the spadefoot, well, you're going to need to make sure that you put on some really wet gear to get out and see those, because they only come out during really intense thunderstorms. Isn't that crazy? So that's just a couple of things about amphibians. Why are they important? They're so important because, number one, they do eat a lot of insects that can cause us some issues. So occasionally they'll eat mosquitoes and those kinds of things. Pardon me. Woo. But they also are good indicators of the health of an aquatic system. So when we see salamanders, when we see frogs, when we see toads, that tells us that an aquatic system is in good shape, because that means that the pollutants are not getting into their system and it's a relatively clean system. Okay. Now, 40% of all of our amphibians in Kentucky are actually in some sort of conservation status, which means that they are either threatened or endangered or of special concern. And the reason that is because of loss of habitat and also because of pollutants that we put in the water. So they're really important for us to be able to keep an eye on them, and by watching them and seeing how their populations do, we can determine whether a system is healthy or not. So if you find salamanders, or you find a frog or a toad or a newt or anything like that, make sure that you keep an eye on that particular system, because if you're still seeing salamanders, it's in good shape, and if you're not, it's something that you need to be concerned about. And you can try and figure out, especially as a junior master gardener, wildlife gardener, what's going on with this particular habitat, and how can I be a help to try and fix it. So I hope that you learned a little bit about amphibians. I hope that there was some good information in there. And just like with reptiles, if you need to contact me, feel free to. I said my email address earlier, but I'll say it again. My email address is Eric, ERIC.Comley, COMLEY @UKY.edu, or you can actually follow me on the Garrett County 4-H Facebook page. So as you all get through this, and you're going through this program, and you start to develop habitat, and you're doing all those cool things and the activities that go along with the Junior Master Gardener, Wildlife Gardener program, I hope that you keep your eyes open and are, observing your habitats and the places around you, because you'll see some incredible things. Snakes and salamanders and turtles and all kinds of really cool things, and even things that I'm not talking about with reptiles and amphibians, birds and mammals and insects. So all kinds of things to look forward to. So if you all have any questions for me, feel free to reach out. But I hope that you all have a good time in the program. Enjoy. Thank you all very much. This is Eric Comley, Garrett County 4-H.